Question 1. Compliance review shows that a Vermont DMV employee is approached by a colleague who is applying for a driver's license and is struggling to understand a section of the application form. The colleague asks the employee to fill out that specific section for them, stating they trust the employee to do it correctly. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the Vermont DMV employee? Option A. Ignore the request and hope the colleague finds someone else to assist them. Option B. Advise the colleague to ask a family member to help them complete that section of the application. Option C. Fill out the requested section of the application form for the colleague, as they have given permission and the employee is knowledgeable. Option D. Politely decline the request and explain that Vermont law prohibits assisting in the completion of another person's driver's license application. Correct answer is D. Politely decline the request and explain that Vermont law prohibits assisting in the completion of another person's driver's license application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a desire to assist a colleague and the strict requirements of Vermont's motor vehicle regulations. The challenge lies in discerning the boundary between helpfulness and regulatory noncompliance, especially when dealing with official documentation and the integrity of the licensing process. Careful judgment is required to uphold the law while navigating interpersonal dynamics. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to politely decline the request and explain that Vermont law prohibits assisting in the completion of another person's driver's license application, even if the intention is to be helpful. This approach upholds the integrity of the Vermont DMV's application process and avoids any appearance of impropriety or violation of Vermont statutes Title 23, Chapter 13, which governs driver licensing and prohibits fraudulent applications or assistance in their completion. It prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct over personal convenience or collegial pressure. Correct approach is analysis. Assisting the colleague by filling out the application form, even with their verbal consent, constitutes aiding in the completion of an official government document by someone not authorized to do so. This could be construed as a violation of Vermont statutes related to the accuracy and authenticity of driver's license applications and could lead to penalties for both individuals involved. Suggesting the colleague ask a family member to help, while seemingly a benign suggestion, still skirts the issue of direct involvement. If the intent is to circumvent the prohibition on assistance, it could still be viewed as indirectly facilitating a violation. The core issue is the prohibition of third-party completion of the application, regardless of who that third party is. Ignoring the request and hoping the colleague finds someone else to help avoids direct confrontation, but fails to address the underlying regulatory concern. While not actively violating the law, it misses an opportunity to educate a colleague about important Vermont regulations and could inadvertently allow a violation to occur if the colleague proceeds with unauthorized assistance from another source. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach situations involving potential regulatory conflicts by first identifying the specific laws or regulations that apply. In this case, understanding Vermont's driver's license application requirements is paramount. When faced with a request that seems to push the boundaries of these regulations, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Clearly identifying the relevant legal or ethical obligation. 2. Evaluating the request against that obligation. 3. Communicating the findings clearly and respectfully. And 4. Offering alternative, compliant solutions if possible, or politely declining if no compliant solution exists. Prioritizing legal and ethical integrity is always the cornerstone of professional conduct. Question 2. Investigation of a request made to a Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles employee by a former acquaintance seeking personal details about a driver, including their current address and driving record, based on a vague claim of needing to settle an old score, presents an ethical dilemma. What is the most appropriate course of action for the DMV employee? Option A. Provide the driver's current address and a summary of their driving record to the former acquaintance, assuming the acquaintance's intent is not overtly criminal. Option B. Advise the former acquaintance on how they might unofficially obtain the driver's information through other means, without directly providing it themselves. Option C. Access the driver's record to verify the acquaintance's claim, and then decide whether to disclose the information based on the perceived legitimacy of the old score. Option D. Politely inform the former acquaintance that driver information is confidential and cannot be disclosed without proper legal authorization, and suggest they consult official channels if they have a legally permissible reason to request such information. The correct answer is D. Politely inform the former acquaintance that driver information is confidential and cannot be disclosed without proper legal authorization, and suggest they consult official channels if they have a legally permissible reason to request such information. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical obligation to protect personal privacy and adhere to Vermont's specific motor vehicle regulations regarding the disclosure of driver information. The challenge lies in recognizing that, while the information might seem helpful in a personal context, unauthorized access or disclosure is a violation of privacy laws and Vermont DMV policies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is legally compliant and ethically sound. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations on accessing and sharing driver information, as stipulated by Vermont law and DMV policy. This approach prioritizes adherence to privacy regulations, understanding that driver records are not public information for casual inquiry. It involves directing the inquirer to the official channels for obtaining information, if such channels exist and are permissible under Vermont law for the stated purpose, or politely declining the request if it falls outside of authorized disclosure parameters. This is correct because Vermont, like all states, has strict laws governing the privacy of drivers' license information, such as those derived from the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act, DPPA, and Vermont's own statutes. These laws restrict who can access driver information and for what purposes, generally limiting it to law enforcement, government agencies, and specific authorized entities for defined reasons. An incorrect approach would be to access the driver's record without proper authorization or a legitimate, legally defined purpose. This constitutes a violation of privacy laws and DMV policy, potentially leading to disciplinary action, fines, and legal consequences. It undermines the trust placed in DMV employees to safeguard sensitive personal information. Another incorrect approach would be to share the information with the inquirer, even if the inquirer claims a personal connection or a seemingly benign reason. This is a direct breach of confidentiality and privacy regulations. The inquirer's relationship to the driver, or their stated intent, does not grant the DMV employee the authority to bypass established legal protocols for information disclosure. A further incorrect approach would be to provide vague or misleading information, or to suggest that the information might be obtainable through unofficial means. This is unprofessional and could inadvertently encourage illegal or unethical behavior by the inquirer. It fails to uphold the integrity of the DMV's operations and its commitment to lawful data handling. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the nature of the request and the information sought. They must then consult their understanding of Vermont's specific laws and DMV policies regarding information access and disclosure. If the request falls outside authorized parameters, the professional should politely and clearly explain the limitations, citing the relevant privacy protections, and if appropriate, direct the inquirer to the correct official channels for information requests that are legally permissible. This ensures accountability, protects privacy, and maintains public trust. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that maintaining impartiality is paramount in regulated environments. If you are a licensed Vermont driver education instructor and your sibling is scheduled for their driver's license road test at the local DMV office where you are a volunteer proctor for administrative tasks, what is the most ethically sound and procedurally correct course of action to ensure the integrity of the examination process? Option A. Ask a colleague to cover your volunteer duties for the day to avoid any potential awkwardness, without formally disclosing your relationship to the DMV supervisor. Option B. Immediately inform the DMV supervisor of your sibling's scheduled test and your relationship, and request to be recused from any duties that might involve interaction with your sibling or their examination. Option C. Discreetly advise your sibling on potential test routes or common examiner questions beforehand to help them prepare, while still performing your volunteer duties. Option D. Proceed with your volunteer duties as usual, assuming your role as a proctor does not directly involve administering the road test and therefore poses no conflict. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the DMV supervisor of your sibling's scheduled test and your relationship, and request to be recused from any duties that might involve interaction with your sibling or their examination. Explanation. The scenario presents a common ethical challenge for individuals operating in regulated environments, balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities and adherence to established rules. The challenge lies in the potential for perceived or actual favoritism, which can undermine public trust and the integrity of the licensing process. Careful judgment is required to ensure fairness and impartiality, even when personal connections are involved. The best approach involves a clear and proactive disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate authority and recusal from any decision-making process that could be influenced by the personal connection. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and upholds the principles of fairness and transparency mandated by Vermont's Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, regulations concerning driver licensing and examinations. By removing oneself from the situation, the individual avoids any appearance of impropriety and ensures that the examination process is conducted objectively, in accordance with Vermont's traffic laws and DMV procedures. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the public interest and maintain the credibility of the licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the examination without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of ethical principles and potentially Vermont DMV guidelines that expect impartiality from examiners. It creates a significant risk of perceived or actual bias, eroding public trust in the fairness of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to subtly assist the applicant during the examination, even if the intention is to be helpful. This constitutes a breach of professional integrity and a violation of the objective assessment required by Vermont's driver testing standards. Such actions would undermine the purpose of the examination, which is to ensure that all applicants meet the required safety and competency standards to operate a vehicle. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delegate the examination to another examiner without informing them of the personal relationship. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct involvement, it still fails to address the underlying ethical issue of potential influence. The responsibility to ensure an unbiased process rests with the individual who has the conflict of interest, and simply passing it on without full transparency is insufficient. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to regulations, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. This involves identifying potential conflicts early, consulting relevant policy and ethical guidelines, and taking decisive action to mitigate any risks to the integrity of the process. Open communication with supervisors or relevant authorities is crucial in navigating these complex situations. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that a Vermont resident, Mr. Henderson, has been diagnosed with a medical condition that could potentially lead to sudden incapacitation. He is seeking to renew his driver's license. Considering Vermont's traffic laws and DMV regulations, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for Mr. Henderson to take regarding his driver's license renewal? Option A. Mr. Henderson should proceed with his license renewal without mentioning his medical condition, assuming it does not currently affect his driving. Option B. Mr. Henderson should proactively inform the Vermont DMV of his medical condition and cooperate with any required medical evaluations or restrictions. Option C. Mr. Henderson should seek advice from his doctor to obtain a note stating he is fit to drive, without informing the Vermont DMV of the diagnosis itself. Option D. Mr. Henderson should immediately cease driving and surrender his license, without consulting the Vermont DMV or seeking medical advice on driving suitability. The correct answer is B. Mr. Henderson should proactively inform the Vermont DMV of his medical condition and cooperate with any required medical evaluations or restrictions. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a Vermont resident, Mr. Henderson, is seeking to renew his driver's license. He has recently been diagnosed with a medical condition that, while not immediately impairing his driving ability, has the potential to cause sudden incapacitation. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the individual's right to mobility and independence with the paramount public safety interest mandated by Vermont's traffic laws and the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, regulations. The core ethical dilemma lies in determining the appropriate course of action without prematurely restricting Mr. Henderson's driving privileges, while also ensuring the safety of other road users. Careful judgment is required to assess the risk and implement necessary safeguards. The best professional approach involves proactively and transparently communicating with Mr. Henderson about the implications of his medical condition for his driving privileges under Vermont law. This includes advising him to voluntarily report his condition to the Vermont DMV as required by Vermont Statutes Annotated, VSA, Title 23, Chapter 13, which governs driver licensing and medical fitness. This approach prioritizes open communication, empowers the individual to comply with regulations, and allows the DMV to conduct a proper medical review. The DMV can then, based on medical evaluations and established protocols, determine if any restrictions, such as requiring a medical review or periodic reevaluation, are necessary to ensure safe operation of a vehicle. This aligns with the ethical principle of acting in the public interest while respecting individual rights and due process. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the condition and proceed with license renewal without any disclosure or further inquiry. This fails to uphold the public safety mandate of Vermont's traffic laws, which implicitly require drivers to be medically fit to operate a vehicle. It also bypasses the established procedures for assessing medical fitness, potentially endangering others. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the license renewal based solely on the diagnosis, without allowing for a medical review or considering the specific nature and potential impact of the condition on driving. This would be an overreach of authority and potentially violate Mr. Henderson's rights, as Vermont law typically requires a process for assessing medical fitness rather than automatic disqualification upon diagnosis. A further incorrect approach would be to advise Mr. Henderson to conceal his condition from the DMV. This is ethically reprehensible and legally problematic, as it encourages non-compliance with Vermont statutes and undermines the integrity of the licensing system. It also places the burden of risk assessment on the individual rather than the regulatory body responsible for public safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve understanding the relevant state statutes and DMV regulations regarding medical conditions and driving. It requires open and honest communication with the individual, explaining their obligations and the potential consequences of noncompliance. The process should then involve facilitating the appropriate regulatory review by the relevant authority, ensuring that decisions are based on evidence and established safety protocols, and respecting the individual's rights throughout the process. Question 5. Assessment of a driver's license applicant's performance during a road test in Vermont reveals a critical error in yielding the right-of-way at an intersection, a maneuver directly addressed in the Vermont driver's manual. The applicant becomes visibly distressed, explaining they are late for an important family commitment. As the examiner, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Acknowledge the applicant's distress and allow them to proceed to the next section of the test, with a note to reevaluate the yielding maneuver later. Option B. Fail the applicant for the critical error and explain that the test must be concluded according to Vermont DMV regulations, offering information on the retesting process. Option C. Issue a provisional permit, explaining that the applicant can complete the full licensing process once their family commitment is resolved. Option D. Advise the applicant on specific techniques to improve their yielding skills immediately, then allow them to retake the failed maneuver. The correct answer is B. Fail the applicant for the critical error and explain that the test must be concluded according to Vermont DMV regulations, offering information on the retesting process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligation to ensure all applicants meet the safety standards mandated by Vermont law. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be helpful must not override the core responsibility of public safety. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the licensing process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the established testing procedures and criteria outlined by the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. This approach prioritizes public safety by ensuring that only individuals who demonstrate the necessary driving skills and knowledge are granted a license. The Vermont DMV's regulations are designed to minimize risks on public roads, and deviating from them, even with good intentions, undermines this objective. Upholding these regulations is an ethical imperative for any DMV examiner. Incorrect approaches analysis. Allowing the applicant to pass despite failing a critical maneuver is a direct violation of Vermont DMV testing protocols. This failure to adhere to established safety standards creates an unacceptable risk to the applicant and other road users, constituting a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Suggesting the applicant retake the test immediately without addressing the specific reasons for failure, such as offering unsolicited driving tips outside the scope of the examiner's role, could be perceived as an attempt to circumvent the formal testing process. While well-intentioned, it blurs the lines of professional conduct and may not adequately prepare the applicant for safe driving. Providing the applicant with a temporary permit without completing the full assessment and determining their competency is a significant regulatory failure. This action bypasses the legal requirements for obtaining a driver's license in Vermont and directly compromises public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulations and ethical guidelines. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the Vermont DMV's driver licensing program. 2. Objectively assessing applicant performance against these criteria without bias or undue influence. 3. Recognizing the ethical responsibility to public safety that accompanies the authority to issue licenses. 4. Communicating test results and next steps clearly and professionally, in accordance with DMV procedures. Question 6. The audit findings indicate that a Vermont licensed driver, while driving their registered vehicle, discovered they had inadvertently left the current proof of insurance and registration documents at home. The driver is only a few miles from their destination and believes there is a low probability of being stopped by law enforcement. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the driver to take? Option A. Drive to their destination and obtain the documents at a later, more convenient time. Option B. Continue driving but be prepared to explain the situation to law enforcement if stopped, hoping for leniency. Option C. Continue driving to their destination, assuming the low probability of being stopped makes the risk acceptable. Option D. Immediately cease driving and arrange to have the required documents brought to them, or retrieve them before continuing their journey. Correct answer is D. Immediately cease driving and arrange to have the required documents brought to them, or retrieve them before continuing their journey. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to Vermont's traffic laws and ethical conduct for licensed drivers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing personal convenience with the legal and ethical obligations of operating a motor vehicle. Driver's responsibility extends beyond simply knowing the rules. It involves actively applying them in real-world situations, even when faced with minor inconveniences or perceived low risk. The core ethical considerations revolve around honesty, responsibility, and the safety of oneself and others on public roadways. The best professional approach involves immediately rectifying the situation by obtaining the required documentation. This aligns with Vermont's statutory requirements for vehicle registration and insurance, which are in place to ensure accountability and public safety. By proactively addressing the missing documentation, the driver demonstrates a commitment to legal compliance and responsible vehicle operation, upholding the integrity of the licensing system and the safety of Vermont's roads. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law and ethical responsibility over personal expediency. Failing to obtain the required registration and insurance documentation before operating the vehicle constitutes a violation of Vermont's motor vehicle laws. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the legal framework designed to protect the public. It demonstrates a lack of respect for the law and a willingness to operate a vehicle without fulfilling fundamental legal obligations, potentially endangering others and creating liability. Another incorrect approach involves assuming that the absence of immediate enforcement negates the requirement. This is ethically flawed as it relies on chance rather than adherence to established regulations. The law is not contingent on the likelihood of being caught. It is a mandate for all drivers. Operating a vehicle without proper registration and insurance, regardless of whether a law enforcement officer is present, is a breach of legal and ethical duty. A third incorrect approach is to delay obtaining the necessary documentation until a more convenient time. This is also professionally unacceptable. The requirement to have valid registration and insurance is a prerequisite for legal operation of a vehicle in Vermont. Postponing compliance demonstrates a disregard for the law and the responsibilities associated with driving. It creates a period of illegal operation, even if brief, and exposes the driver and others to unnecessary risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical responsibility. This involves understanding the specific requirements of Vermont's motor vehicle laws, such as those pertaining to registration and insurance. When faced with a situation where documentation is missing, the immediate and responsible action is to cease operation of the vehicle until all legal requirements are met. This proactive approach ensures that one is operating lawfully and ethically, contributing to a safer road environment for everyone in Vermont. Question 7. Regulatory review indicates that a Vermont resident is attempting to obtain a driver's license, but is presenting documentation that the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, may not immediately recognize as standard proof of identity and lawful presence. What is the most appropriate course of action for an individual assisting this applicant in navigating the Vermont DMV's requirements? Option A. Inform the applicant that their documents are not acceptable and deny them further assistance without explaining why or suggesting alternatives. Option B. Accept the applicant's assurance that their provided documents are sufficient for obtaining a Vermont driver's license without further verification. Option C. Advise the applicant on the specific types of identification and proof of lawful presence that are explicitly listed as acceptable by the Vermont DMV, guiding them to gather the correct documentation. Option D. Provide general advice about what constitutes identification without referring to the precise documentation standards set by the Vermont DMV. The correct answer is C. Advise the applicant on the specific types of identification and proof of lawful presence that are explicitly listed as acceptable by the Vermont DMV, guiding them to gather the correct documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Vermont resident seeking to obtain a driver's license. The challenge lies in navigating the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, regulations regarding the documentation required for proof of identity and lawful presence, particularly when dealing with documents that may not be immediately recognizable or standard. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Vermont's specific legal requirements without causing undue delay or frustration to the applicant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves diligently reviewing the Vermont DMV's official documentation requirements for driver's licenses and advising the applicant on the specific types of identification and proof of lawful presence that are acceptable. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to Vermont's statutory and regulatory framework governing driver's license issuance, ensuring that the applicant is guided towards a compliant path. The Vermont DMV's website and official publications clearly outline acceptable documents, and a professional's duty is to accurately convey this information. This prevents the applicant from submitting insufficient documentation, which would lead to rejection and a need to reapply, thus saving time and resources for both the applicant and the DMV. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's assertion that their documents are sufficient without verifying them against Vermont's specific requirements. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the established regulatory process. The Vermont DMV has specific criteria for acceptable documents, and an assumption of sufficiency without verification can lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who does not meet the legal standards for identity or lawful presence, potentially compromising public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the applicant's documents outright without a thorough review or offering guidance on alternative acceptable forms of identification. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a lack of diligence and customer service. While the initial documents may not be immediately recognized, Vermont's regulations often allow for a range of acceptable documents, and a professional should be knowledgeable enough to guide the applicant towards compliant alternatives if their initial submission is problematic. This approach can create unnecessary barriers for individuals seeking to comply with the law. A further incorrect approach is to provide vague or generalized advice about acceptable documents without referencing the specific requirements of the Vermont DMV. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to equip the applicant with the precise information needed to succeed. Vague advice can lead to further confusion and the submission of incorrect or incomplete documentation, ultimately hindering the applicant's progress and potentially requiring multiple visits to the DMV. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, they must familiarize themselves with the current Vermont DMV regulations concerning driver's license applications, paying close attention to the acceptable forms of identification and proof of lawful presence. Second, when presented with an applicant's documentation, they should compare it directly against these established requirements. Third, if the documentation appears insufficient or problematic, they should clearly and politely explain which specific requirements are not met and provide concrete examples of acceptable alternative documents as outlined by the Vermont DMV. This ensures transparency, compliance, and efficient processing of the application. Question 8. Consider a scenario where you are driving on a 2-lane highway in Vermont during a moderate fog, reducing visibility to approximately 100 feet. You observe a slow-moving farm vehicle ahead of you, and oncoming traffic is visible intermittently through the fog. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure safety and compliance with Vermont traffic regulations? Option A. Assume the oncoming traffic will stop or yield to allow you to pass the farm vehicle. Option B. Attempt to pass the farm vehicle immediately, as oncoming traffic is only intermittently visible. Option C. Maintain the posted speed limit, as fog does not negate the legal speed. Option D. Significantly reduce speed, increase observation of both the farm vehicle and oncoming traffic, and prepare to yield or stop if necessary. The correct answer is D. Significantly reduce speed, increase observation of both the farm vehicle and oncoming traffic, and prepare to yield or stop if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to interpret and react to a complex, dynamic traffic situation involving multiple potential hazards. The driver must not only understand the rules of the road, but also apply them in real time, considering the actions of other road users and the specific environmental conditions. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and avoid violations, especially when faced with ambiguity or pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the immediate environment and a proactive approach to safety. This means slowing down significantly, observing all traffic signals and signs, and yielding to any traffic that has the right-of-way or poses a potential hazard. Specifically in Vermont, drivers are obligated under 23 V.S.A. Section 1031 to operate their vehicles at a speed that is reasonable and prudent for the conditions, and to maintain control of their vehicle. This approach prioritizes compliance with Vermont's traffic laws and the fundamental ethical duty to operate a vehicle safely, thereby preventing accidents and protecting all road users. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding at the posted speed limit without further observation fails to account for the reduced visibility and the potential for unexpected events, violating the principle of operating at a reasonable and prudent speed under Vermont Law 23 V.S.A. Section 1031. This approach is negligent as it does not adequately assess risk. Attempting to pass the slower vehicle immediately, despite the limited visibility and oncoming traffic, demonstrates a disregard for the safety of oneself and others. This action could lead to a head-on collision or a violation of Vermont's rules regarding passing on a 2-lane highway, which require clear visibility and sufficient space. 23 V.S.A. Section 1041. Assuming the oncoming vehicle will stop or yield is a dangerous assumption that places undue reliance on the actions of another driver. Vermont law requires drivers to anticipate potential hazards and act defensively, not to assume other drivers will always act predictably or safely. This approach is a direct violation of the duty of care owed to other road users. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to hazard perception and risk management. This involves scanning the environment, identifying potential hazards, assessing the risk associated with each hazard, and taking appropriate action to mitigate that risk. In driving, this translates to maintaining situational awareness, adhering to speed limits and other traffic laws, and always prioritizing safety over expediency. When faced with uncertainty or reduced visibility, the default action should be to reduce speed and increase observation. Question 9. Upon reviewing your Vermont driver's license, You discover it expired yesterday and you have an urgent appointment across town that you need to get to. Considering Vermont's traffic laws, what is the most responsible course of action to take regarding operating your vehicle? Option A. Drive your vehicle, but only for short distances and at low speeds to minimize risk. Option B. Operate your vehicle using your expired Vermont driver's license, as it only recently expired and you have an urgent appointment. Option C. Immediately cease all driving activities until a valid Vermont driver's license is obtained. Option D. Drive your vehicle and explain to any law enforcement officer that you were unaware of the expiration date and have an urgent appointment. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all driving activities until a valid Vermont driver's license is obtained. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for transportation with the legal and safety obligations associated with operating a motor vehicle in Vermont. The core conflict lies between personal convenience and adherence to state law, which prioritizes public safety. A careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could lead to legal penalties and compromise road safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing all driving activities until a valid Vermont driver's license is obtained. This approach directly aligns with Vermont's statutory requirements for operating a motor vehicle. Vermont Statutes Annotated, VSA, Title 23, Chapter 13, Section 601, mandates that no person shall operate a motor vehicle upon any public highway in this state unless such person is licensed in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. By not driving, the individual avoids violating this fundamental law, thereby upholding their legal responsibility and contributing to public safety by not operating a vehicle without proper authorization and demonstrated competency. Incorrect approaches analysis. Operating a vehicle with an expired out-of-state license, even if recently expired, is a violation of Vermont law. Vermont Statutes Annotated, Title 23, Chapter 13, Section 601, requires a valid license to operate on public highways. Relying on the expired license implies a belief that it still holds validity for operation in Vermont, which is incorrect. This approach demonstrates a disregard for the specific licensing requirements of the jurisdiction. Attempting to drive by claiming ignorance of the expiration date or the specific Vermont requirements is not a valid legal defense. Vermont law places the responsibility on the operator to ensure their license is valid and to comply with the state's regulations. This approach shows a lack of due diligence and an attempt to circumvent legal obligations through an excuse. Driving only for short distances or at low speeds does not exempt an individual from the requirement of possessing a valid Vermont driver's license. Vermont Statutes Annotated, Title 23, Chapter 13, Section 601, applies to the operation of a motor vehicle upon any public highway, regardless of the distance or speed. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of the scope of the law and an attempt to rationalize a violation. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a proactive and law-abiding stance. The decision-making process should prioritize understanding and adhering to the specific regulations of the jurisdiction in which they are operating. This involves researching licensing requirements, understanding the implications of expired or invalid credentials, and prioritizing legal compliance over personal convenience. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the relevant authorities, such as the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, is the most responsible course of action. Question 10. When evaluating a driver's ability to demonstrate safe stopping distances on Vermont roadways, a new driver applicant is tested at a speed of 50 miles per hour. Their measured reaction time is 1.5 seconds, assuming a coefficient of friction //mu/ of 0.7 for dry asphalt and an acceleration due to gravity /g/ of 32 feet per second squared. What is the total stopping distance in feet? Option A, approximately 276.8 feet. Option B, approximately 165.0 feet. Option C, approximately 111.8 feet. Option D, approximately 195.0 feet. The correct answer is A, approximately 276.8 feet. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise application of mathematical principle to a real-world situation governed by specific Vermont traffic regulations. The challenge lies in accurately calculating the required stopping distance based on varying conditions and ensuring that the driver's perception and reaction time are factored in, as mandated by Vermont's driver's manual and related statutes concerning safe driving distances. Miscalculation can lead to a failure to meet licensing requirements, highlighting the importance of meticulous attention to detail and understanding the underlying physics of vehicle motion. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the total stopping distance by summing the reaction distance and the braking distance. The reaction distance is determined by multiplying the vehicle's speed by the driver's reaction time. The braking distance is calculated using the formula derived from physics principles, which accounts for the vehicle's speed and the coefficient of friction between the tires and the road surface, adjusted for Vermont-specific road conditions as outlined in the Vermont Driver's Manual. This approach directly aligns with the principles of safe driving and the regulatory requirements for demonstrating adequate stopping distance awareness. Specifically, Vermont law and the Driver's Manual emphasize understanding the factors that influence stopping distance, including speed, reaction time, and road conditions. The formula for braking distance, often simplified as dB equals frac V22 mu g where V is velocity mu is the coefficient of friction, and g is acceleration due to gravity, is a fundamental concept taught for safe driving. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely calculate the braking distance without accounting for the driver's reaction time. This fails to acknowledge that a driver needs time to perceive a hazard and initiate braking, a critical component of safe stopping. Vermont regulations and driver education emphasize that stopping distance is a combination of reaction and braking. Another incorrect approach is to only consider the reaction distance and ignore the braking distance. This is fundamentally flawed as it underestimates the distance a vehicle will travel once the brakes are applied, leading to a dangerous underestimation of the total stopping distance. A third incorrect approach is to use a simplified, fixed distance for all speeds, such as a rule of thumb that doesn't incorporate the mathematical relationship between speed and stopping distance. This ignores the quadratic relationship between speed and braking distance, which is crucial for accurate calculations and safe driving practices as understood and tested in Vermont. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first identifying the specific Vermont regulations and driver's manual sections pertaining to stopping distances and safe driving practices. They should then break down the problem into its constituent parts, reaction distance and braking distance. For reaction distance, they must use the driver's stated reaction time and the vehicle's speed. For braking distance, they must apply the appropriate physics-based formula, considering any Vermont-specific adjustments for road conditions, e.g., wet or icy surfaces, though for this question, standard dry conditions are assumed unless otherwise specified. The sum of these two distances provides the total stopping distance, which is then compared against the required standard. This systematic, calculation-based approach ensures compliance with regulatory requirements and promotes a deep understanding of the physics of safe driving. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a new driver in Vermont, having successfully passed their written knowledge test, is preparing for their road skills test. Considering Vermont's graduated driver licensing (GDL) program for junior operators, which of the following best ensures the driver is prepared to demonstrate compliance with state-specific regulations during their road test? Option A. Reviewing Vermont-specific GDL restrictions for junior operators, including curfews, passenger limitations, and electronic device usage, and confirming the driver's understanding and ability to adhere to these rules. Option B. Relying on the driver's previous driving experience or knowledge gained from obtaining a license in another state, without specific review of Vermont's unique GDL laws. Option C. Conducting a brief overview of traffic laws, prioritizing speed to complete the preparation session quickly, without in-depth confirmation of the driver's comprehension of Vermont's GDL requirements. Option D. Focusing primarily on general driving maneuvers such as parking, lane changes, and braking, assuming that knowledge of basic driving skills is sufficient for all Vermont drivers. The correct answer is A. Reviewing Vermont-specific GDL restrictions for junior operators, including curfews, passenger limitations, and electronic device usage, and confirming the driver's understanding and ability to adhere to these rules. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a new driver in Vermont, having recently passed their written knowledge test, is preparing for their road skills test. The challenge lies in ensuring the driver understands and can demonstrate compliance with Vermont's specific traffic laws and safe driving practices, particularly concerning the Graduated Driver Licensing (GDL) program for junior operators. The professional responsibility is to assess the driver's readiness not just by rote memorization, but by their ability to apply knowledge in real-world driving situations, adhering to Vermont statutes. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of Vermont's GDL restrictions for junior operators, focusing on practical application. This includes understanding and demonstrating adherence to curfews, passenger limitations, and electronic device usage rules as stipulated by Vermont law. The justification for this approach is rooted in Vermont Statutes Annotated, VSA, Title 23, Chapter 13, which outlines the requirements and restrictions for junior operator licenses. Ensuring the driver can articulate and demonstrate these specific Vermont regulations is paramount to safe operation and legal compliance. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on general driving maneuvers without emphasizing the specific GDL restrictions applicable in Vermont. This fails to address the unique legal obligations of a junior operator in the state, potentially leading to violations and a lack of preparedness for the specific challenges faced by new drivers under Vermont law. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the driver's prior knowledge from another state's licensing process is sufficient. Vermont has its own distinct GDL program and traffic laws, and relying on generalized knowledge overlooks the critical need for state-specific understanding and compliance, as mandated by VSA Title 23. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, rushing through the review without confirming the driver's comprehension of Vermont's GDL rules, is also professionally unsound. This neglects the core purpose of the GDL program, which is to gradually introduce new drivers to the responsibilities of driving in a safe and controlled manner, as intended by Vermont legislation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes state-specific legal compliance and safety. This involves identifying the relevant statutes, VSA Title 23, Chapter 13, for GDL, assessing the driver's understanding of those specific requirements, and confirming their ability to apply that knowledge in practical driving scenarios. The goal is to ensure the driver is not only competent in basic driving skills, but also fully aware of and compliant with the legal framework governing their operation of a vehicle in Vermont. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a Vermont driver's license road test, an applicant approaches a situation requiring a lane change to the left. The examiner observes the applicant check their rearview mirror, activate the left turn signal, and then proceed to change lanes, yielding to an approaching vehicle in the target lane. Which of the following actions by the examiner best reflects adherence to Vermont's traffic laws and safe driving principles? Option A. The examiner instructs the applicant to change lanes aggressively, cutting off an approaching vehicle. Option B. The examiner allows the applicant to change lanes immediately after signaling, without further verification of safety. Option C. The examiner overlooks the applicant's failure to signal their intention to change lanes, even if the maneuver is otherwise safe. Option D. The examiner observes the applicant check mirrors, signal, and change lanes only after ensuring it is safe and does not impede other traffic. The correct answer is D. The examiner observes the applicant check mirrors, signal, and change lanes only after ensuring it is safe and does not impede other traffic. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Vermont's traffic laws, but also the ability to apply them in a dynamic, real-world driving situation. The examiner must assess the applicant's judgment and adherence to safety protocols under potential pressure, ensuring they can operate a vehicle responsibly within the state's specific regulatory framework. The challenge lies in evaluating subtle behaviors and decision-making processes that go beyond rote memorization of rules. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the examiner observing the applicant's ability to safely and legally execute a lane change, specifically by checking mirrors, signaling intentions, and then performing the maneuver only when it is safe to do so, without impeding other traffic. This approach directly aligns with Vermont's traffic laws concerning lane changes, which prioritize safety and the avoidance of hazards. Vermont Statutes Annotated Title 23, Chapter 21, Section 1021 mandates that a driver shall not change lanes until the movement can be made with reasonable safety, and shall give a signal of intention to change lanes. This approach demonstrates the applicant's understanding and practical application of these safety-focused regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be for the examiner to allow the applicant to change lanes immediately after signaling, without verifying that it is safe or that other traffic is not impeded. This fails to uphold Vermont's traffic laws, specifically the requirement for reasonable safety before executing the maneuver, and could lead to a dangerous situation or an accident. It demonstrates a lack of adherence to the core principles of safe driving mandated by the state. Another incorrect approach would be for the examiner to instruct the applicant to change lanes aggressively, cutting off another vehicle. This directly violates Vermont's traffic laws and ethical driving standards, prioritizing speed or expediency over the safety of other road users. Such an action would be a severe dereliction of the examiner's duty to ensure the applicant will be a safe driver. A further incorrect approach would be to disregard the applicant's failure to signal their intention to change lanes, even if the maneuver itself was executed safely. Vermont Statutes Annotated Title 23, Chapter 21, Section 1021 explicitly requires a signal. Ignoring this omission means the applicant is not demonstrating full compliance with the law, and the examiner is failing to assess their understanding of signaling requirements, which are crucial for communicating intentions to other drivers and preventing collisions. Professional reasoning. Professionals conducting driver's license examinations in Vermont must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and strict adherence to Vermont's traffic statutes. This involves a systematic observation of the applicant's actions, comparing them against the legal requirements and established safe driving practices. When evaluating maneuvers like lane changes, the examiner must assess not only the mechanical execution, but also the applicant's judgment regarding traffic conditions, their use of signaling devices, and their overall awareness of their surroundings. Any deviation from Vermont law or established safety protocols should result in a failure to pass, as the primary objective is to ensure that licensed drivers are competent and safe on Vermont roadways. Question 13. Implementation of a safe driving strategy in Vermont. What should a driver do when they observe a law enforcement vehicle with its emergency lights activated approaching from behind them on a two-lane highway? Option A. Continue driving at the current speed, assuming the emergency vehicle is not intending to stop them but is merely passing through. Option B. Accelerate to reach the next exit or a more convenient location to pull over. Option C. Immediately and safely slow down, check mirrors for traffic, and prepare to pull over to the right side of the roadway as soon as it is safe to do so. Option D. Pull over to the left side of the roadway to allow the emergency vehicle to pass. Correct answer is C. Immediately and safely slow down, check mirrors for traffic, and prepare to pull over to the right side of the roadway as soon as it is safe to do so. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to interpret and react to a dynamic traffic situation involving a law enforcement vehicle with activated emergency lights. Driver must balance the immediate need to comply with traffic laws and ensure safety, with the potential for confusion or misinterpretation of the situation. Careful judgment is required to avoid creating further hazards or impeding emergency services. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and safely slowing down, checking mirrors for traffic, and preparing to pull over to the right side of the roadway as soon as it is safe to do so. This approach is correct because Vermont law, specifically Title 23, Chapter 123, Section 1013, mandates that drivers yield the right-of-way to approaching emergency vehicles displaying flashing lights and sounding sirens. Pulling over to the right side of the road is the standard procedure to allow the emergency vehicle to pass unimpeded, ensuring public safety and facilitating the emergency response. This action demonstrates responsible driving and adherence to traffic regulations designed to manage such situations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to slow down and continuing at the same speed, even if the driver believes they are not being directly signaled to stop, is an ethical and regulatory failure. Vermont law requires drivers to yield to emergency vehicles. Ignoring the visual cue of flashing lights, even without a direct command to stop, can be interpreted as a failure to yield, and could impede the emergency vehicle's progress. Attempting to accelerate to reach a destination or a more convenient stopping location before pulling over is also a significant regulatory failure. Vermont traffic laws prioritize the immediate safety and unimpeded passage of emergency vehicles. Delaying the stop, even for a short period, can have serious consequences for the emergency response and is a direct violation of the duty to yield. Pulling over to the left side of the roadway or stopping in a travel lane is a dangerous and regulatory failure. This action obstructs the path of the emergency vehicle, creates a hazard for other traffic, and directly contravenes the intent of yielding laws, which is to clear the path for the emergency vehicle. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations with a proactive and safety-oriented mindset. The decision-making process should prioritize immediate compliance with traffic laws related to emergency vehicles. This involves recognizing the visual cues of emergency lights, understanding the legal obligation to yield, and executing a safe and appropriate maneuver to allow the emergency vehicle to proceed. If unsure about the specific intent, e.g., being pulled over versus passing, the safest and most legally compliant action is to slow down and prepare to pull over, thereby ensuring safety and avoiding potential violations. Question 14. To address the challenge of navigating a busy intersection in Burlington, Vermont, a driver approaches a traffic light that is currently displaying a steady red signal. The driver observes other vehicles in adjacent lanes also stopped at the line. The driver is unsure if they should proceed cautiously or wait for a change in the signal. Based on Vermont's traffic regulations, what is the safest and most legally compliant action for the driver to take? Option A. Stop in the middle of the intersection once the driver realizes the light is red. Option B. Proceed through the intersection if no other vehicles are immediately visible in the cross-traffic lanes. Option C. Proceed through the intersection cautiously, assuming the light will change soon. Option D. Stop behind the stop line and wait for a green light or a green arrow. The correct answer is D. Stop behind the stop line and wait for a green light or a green arrow. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make a critical decision under pressure, balancing immediate safety with adherence to established traffic laws. The driver must accurately assess the situation, understand the implications of their actions according to Vermont's traffic regulation, and prioritize the safety of all road users. Misinterpreting the situation or the law could lead to a violation, an accident, or both. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the driver carefully observing the traffic signal and the actions of other vehicles. If the light is red and there is no indication that it is about to change or that it is safe to proceed, e.g., no green arrow, no police directing traffic, the driver must stop behind the stop line. This aligns with Vermont's traffic laws, specifically Title 23, Chapter 123, Section 1001, which mandates that drivers facing a steady circular red signal shall stop at a clearly marked stop line, or if none, before entering the crosswalk on the near side of the intersection, or if none, then before entering the intersection, and shall remain standing until an indication to proceed is shown. This approach prioritizes safety and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding through the intersection when the light is red without a clear indication of permission to do so is a direct violation of Vermont traffic law. This action demonstrates a failure to observe and obey traffic signals, creating a significant risk of collision with cross-traffic or pedestrians. Assuming the light will change imminently and proceeding without a clear signal to do so is also a violation. Vermont law requires a positive indication to proceed, not an assumption. This behavior is reckless and disregards the safety of others who may have the right-of-way. Stopping abruptly in the middle of the intersection after realizing the light is red is dangerous and illegal. This action could cause a rear-end collision, obstruct traffic, and create a hazardous situation for other drivers and pedestrians. Vermont law requires stopping before entering the intersection on a red light. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and situational awareness. This involves 1. Thoroughly observing the environment and gathering all relevant information, traffic signals, other vehicles, pedestrians. 2. Understanding and applying relevant laws and regulations, Vermont traffic laws regarding signals. 3. Evaluating potential risks and consequences of different actions. 4. Choosing the safest and most legally compliant course of action. In this case, the driver must prioritize stopping on red unless explicitly permitted to proceed, ensuring the safety of themselves and others. Question 15. Examination of the data shows a Vermont resident applying for driver's license has disclosed a chronic medical condition that their physician has stated is generally manageable, but can occasionally cause temporary episodes of impaired concentration. The Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles is reviewing the application. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Vermont's driver licensing regulations and public safety? Option A. Immediately deny the license application upon learning of the medical condition, citing potential safety concerns. Option B. Request a detailed medical report from the applicant's treating physician, including an assessment of the condition's impact on concentration, its frequency and duration of episodes, and any recommended driving limitations or accommodations, to inform the licensing decision. Option C. Impose a blanket restriction on all driving during daylight hours for the applicant, regardless of the specific nature of their concentration impairment. Option D. Issue a standard driver's license without further inquiry, assuming the applicant's disclosure is sufficient and their physician would have advised against driving if it were unsafe. The correct answer is B. Request a detailed medical report from the applicant's treating physician, including an assessment of the condition's impact on concentration, its frequency and duration of episodes, and any recommended driving limitations or accommodations, to inform the licensing decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Vermont resident applying for a driver's license who has a medical condition that could potentially impair their driving ability. The challenge lies in balancing the individual's right to obtain a license with the paramount public safety interest. A careful judgment is required to ensure that only safe drivers are licensed, without unfairly discriminating against individuals with medical conditions. The Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, has a responsibility to uphold these principles. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and individualized assessment of the applicant's medical condition and its potential impact on driving. This approach prioritizes safety by gathering all necessary information to make an informed decision. Specifically, it requires the applicant to provide a medical evaluation from their treating physician, detailing the nature of their condition, its stability, and any recommended driving restrictions or accommodations. This aligns with Vermont's commitment to ensuring all licensed drivers meet the necessary physical and mental standards for safe operation of a motor vehicle, as outlined in Vermont Statutes Annotated, VSA, Title 23, Chapter 13, which governs driver licensing and includes provisions for medical fitness. This approach ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of Vermont law by focusing on demonstrable safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the license based solely on the mention of a medical condition without any further investigation. This fails to acknowledge that many medical conditions do not inherently prevent safe driving and could constitute discrimination, violating principles of fairness and potentially Vermont's anti-discrimination laws. It bypasses the required due diligence mandated by the Vermont DMV to assess individual capacity. Another incorrect approach is to grant the license without any medical review, assuming the applicant is fit to drive simply because they have not been explicitly prohibited by their doctor. This approach disregards the Vermont DMV's responsibility to proactively ensure driver safety and could lead to an unsafe driver operating a vehicle, posing a risk to themselves and others. It fails to meet the statutory requirement for medical fitness for licensure. A third incorrect approach is to impose overly broad and unnecessary restrictions on the license without a specific medical basis. For example, restricting driving to daylight hours when the medical condition does not affect night vision. This is an arbitrary restriction that infringes on the applicant's rights without a clear safety justification and is not supported by the medical information provided or by Vermont's licensing regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of Vermont's driver licensing laws regarding medical fitness. 2. Recognizing the need for an individualized assessment rather than making assumptions based on a diagnosis. 3. Actively seeking and evaluating relevant medical documentation. 4. Consulting with medical professionals when necessary to interpret findings. 5. Making a decision that is both compliant with regulations and prioritizes public safety, while also being fair to the applicant. Question 16. Research into Vermont's traffic regulations reveals a scenario where a driver approaches a section of highway undergoing construction. Permanent lane markings indicate 2 lanes continuing straight. However, temporary, official construction signage clearly directs traffic to merge left into the left lane. The right lane is blocked off by cones and barriers. What is the safest and most legally compliant action for the driver to take? Option A. Continue straight in the right lane, assuming the temporary signage is an error. Option B. Attempt to merge into the right lane, believing the construction is temporary and the permanent markings will soon apply. Option C. Stop in the right lane to wait for further instructions or for the construction to clear. Option D. Merge left into the left lane as directed by the temporary construction signage. Correct answer is D. Merge left into the left lane as directed by the temporary construction signage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to interpret ambiguous road markings and apply knowledge of Vermont's specific traffic laws in a dynamic, real-world situation. The driver must not only recall the rules, but also make a judgment call under pressure, considering the safety of themselves and others. The presence of construction and temporary signage adds complexity, demanding a higher level of situational awareness and adherence to potentially altered traffic control devices. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing safety and adhering strictly to the most current and clearly indicated traffic control devices, even if they appear to contradict permanent markings. This means yielding to the temporary construction signage that directs traffic to merge left, as these signals are intended to manage immediate hazards and traffic flow in a changed environment. Vermont statutes, such as those pertaining to construction zones and temporary traffic control, emphasize the driver's responsibility to obey all official traffic control devices, including temporary ones. This approach ensures compliance with the law and minimizes risk in a potentially hazardous situation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding straight based on the permanent lane markings, despite the temporary signage, is incorrect because it disregards official, albeit temporary, traffic control devices. Vermont law mandates obedience to all traffic control devices, and temporary signs in construction zones are specifically designed to override permanent markings for safety reasons. This action could lead to a collision or impede traffic flow, violating Vermont's rules of the road. Attempting to force a merge into the right lane, assuming the temporary signage is a mistake, is also incorrect. This demonstrates a failure to yield to official direction and an assumption about the intent of the traffic control. It creates an unpredictable situation for other drivers and violates the principle of obeying traffic signals. Such an action could be considered reckless driving. Stopping to wait for clarification or for the situation to resolve itself is incorrect because it obstructs traffic flow and creates a hazard. While caution is important, a complete stop in a moving lane of traffic without an immediate emergency is generally prohibited and unsafe, especially when a clear, albeit temporary, directive is provided. Vermont traffic laws expect drivers to proceed when safe and in accordance with traffic control devices. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying all traffic control devices present, both permanent and temporary. They should then prioritize temporary devices, especially those related to construction or emergencies, as these are designed to address immediate conditions. A mental checklist should include 1. Identify all signs and markings. 2. Prioritize temporary/construction signage. 3. Assess the immediate safety implications of each option. 4. Choose the action that aligns with the highest priority traffic control device and ensures the safety of all road users. Question 17. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Vermont DMV road test examiner when evaluating an applicant who appears visibly nervous, but has otherwise demonstrated competence in most driving maneuvers during their road test? Option A. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of all required driving skills against the Vermont Driver's Manual and standardized testing criteria, documenting performance accurately. Option B. Pass the applicant based on a subjective feeling of confidence after observing a few successful maneuvers, overlooking minor deviations due to nervousness. Option C. Provide extensive verbal guidance and corrections during the test to help the nervous applicant succeed. Option D. Fail the applicant immediately due to their visible nervousness, regardless of their demonstrated driving skills. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of all required driving skills against the Vermont Driver's Manual and standardized testing criteria, documenting performance accurately. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a driver's perceived ability to operate a vehicle safely and the objective requirements of Vermont's driver licensing regulations. A licensing examiner must balance empathy and understanding with a strict adherence to safety standards to protect the public. Misjudging a candidate's readiness can have severe consequences, including accidents and injuries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills against the established Vermont Driver's Manual and the practical testing criteria. This approach prioritizes public safety by ensuring that only individuals who demonstrate proficiency in all required maneuvers and adherence to traffic laws are licensed. The Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, regulations mandate that all applicants must pass a road test that evaluates their ability to operate a vehicle safely and in compliance with Vermont statutes. This objective evaluation, documented through a standardized scoring system, is the sole determinant of licensing eligibility for this aspect of the test. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to pass the applicant based on a subjective feeling of confidence or a brief, informal observation of their driving, without systematically evaluating all required skills. This fails to comply with Vermont DMV regulations, which require a comprehensive road test. It also creates an ethical failure by potentially endangering other road users. Another incorrect approach would be to fail the applicant solely because they exhibit nervousness, even if they successfully complete all required maneuvers and demonstrate safe driving practices. While nervousness is a factor to consider in overall composure, it should not override demonstrated competence in the core driving skills as defined by Vermont's testing standards. Failing without objective evidence of skill deficiency would be arbitrary and not in line with the purpose of the road test. A further incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant to practice during the test, providing extensive verbal guidance or correcting their mistakes in real time. This deviates from the standardized testing protocol, which requires the applicant to demonstrate independent safe driving. It also compromises the integrity of the test as a measure of the applicant's unaided ability and is not permitted under Vermont DMV guidelines for road testing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should always refer to the official Vermont Driver's Manual and the DMV's standardized road test checklist. They must conduct a systematic, objective evaluation, documenting each observed behavior against the established criteria. If an applicant fails to meet the standards, the examiner must clearly articulate the specific reasons for failure, referencing the relevant sections of the manual or testing criteria. This ensures fairness, transparency, and adherence to regulatory requirements, prioritizing public safety above all else. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that a driver's license applicant in Vermont is demonstrating generally competent driving skills, including proper use of turn signals and maintaining appropriate lane position. However, during the test, the applicant momentarily exceeds the posted speed limit by 3 mph on a straight, clear stretch of highway with no other vehicles present. The examiner is tasked with determining whether this incident warrants a failure of the driving test. Option A. The examiner should pass the applicant regardless of the speed infraction, as long as they are otherwise following directions and appear to be a safe driver. Option B. The examiner should consider the applicant's overall safe driving performance, adherence to other Vermont traffic laws, and the specific context of the speed infraction to make a determination. Option C. The examiner should automatically fail the applicant because exceeding the posted speed limit, even by a small margin, is a direct violation of Vermont's traffic laws. Option D. The examiner should focus solely on whether the applicant can follow the examiner's directions precisely, and any minor traffic law deviations should be overlooked if the applicant is otherwise compliant. Correct answer is B. The examiner should consider the applicant's overall safe driving performance, adherence to other Vermont traffic laws, and the specific context of the speed infraction to make a determination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Vermont's traffic laws, but also the ability to apply them in a dynamic, real-world driving situation. The examiner must assess the applicant's judgment, situational awareness, and adherence to safety protocols, which go beyond rote memorization. The pressure of a driving test can also affect an applicant's performance, making objective assessment crucial. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the examiner observing the applicant's overall driving behavior, including their adherence to speed limits, proper signaling, lane discipline, and defensive driving techniques, while also noting any specific violations of Vermont's traffic statutes. This approach ensures a comprehensive evaluation of the applicant's readiness to operate a vehicle safely and legally on Vermont roadways, directly aligning with the purpose of the Vermont DMV's driver licensing requirements. The examiner's role is to assess the applicant's ability to navigate and comply with all aspects of Vermont's vehicle traffic laws, not just isolated infractions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Observing only for minor infractions, such as a single instance of slightly exceeding the speed limit by 1 or 2 miles per hour, without considering the overall context of safe driving, is insufficient. This approach fails to evaluate the applicant's broader understanding of safe driving practices and their ability to maintain control and awareness in varied traffic conditions, as mandated by Vermont's licensing standards. Focusing solely on the applicant's ability to follow directions precisely, without assessing their adherence to traffic laws and safe driving techniques, overlooks critical safety aspects. The Vermont DMV's objective is to license competent and safe drivers, not merely those who can follow instructions. Ignoring any potential violations because the applicant appears nervous or is performing well in other areas is a failure to uphold the integrity of the licensing process. Every applicant must demonstrate compliance with Vermont's traffic laws, regardless of their perceived stress level or performance in other aspects of the test. This would be a dereliction of the examiner's duty to ensure public safety on Vermont's roads. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic evaluation process that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves understanding the core objectives of the licensing examination, which in Vermont is to ensure drivers can operate vehicles safely and in accordance with state laws. Examiners should use a checklist or rubric that covers all essential driving skills and legal requirements, allowing for objective assessment. They must remain impartial, focusing on observable behaviors and adherence to regulations, rather than making subjective judgments based on perceived nervousness or isolated incidents. The decision-making process should be grounded in the Vermont vehicle traffic laws and the established protocols for driver testing. Question 19. The efficiency study reveals a consistent backlog in processing new driver's license applications at the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. Considering the need to maintain public trust and ensure compliance with Vermont's motor vehicle laws, which of the following strategies would be the most professionally sound and ethically responsible approach to address this backlog? Option A. Implement a priority processing system for applicants who express a strong personal need for a license, such as for employment or family emergencies, without altering the underlying processing steps. Option B. Increase the application fee for all new licenses to generate revenue for hiring additional temporary staff to work overtime, without a prior analysis of the causes of the backlog. Option C. Streamline the application process by reducing the number of required identity verification documents and background checks to expedite approvals. Option D. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, assess staffing and technology needs, and propose targeted improvements based on data. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, assess staffing and technology needs, and propose targeted improvements based on data. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a recurring pattern of delays in processing new driver's license applications at the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient government operations with the fundamental right of Vermont residents to obtain a driver's license, which is essential for employment, transportation, and daily life. A careful judgment is required to identify the root cause of the delays and implement solutions that are both effective and compliant with Vermont's traffic and motor vehicle laws. The best professional approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the application processing workflow. This includes analyzing each step from initial submission to final issuance, identifying bottlenecks, and assessing the adequacy of staffing and technology. The goal is to pinpoint specific areas of inefficiency, such as outdated software, insufficient training for clerks, or cumbersome manual data entry, and propose targeted improvements. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the operational issues identified by the efficiency study in a systematic and compliant manner, adhering to the spirit and letter of Vermont statutes governing the issuance of driver's licenses, which prioritize accuracy and fairness, while also aiming for reasonable processing times. An incorrect approach would be to implement a blanket policy of expediting applications based on subjective criteria, such as an applicant's perceived urgency or social standing. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the principle of equal treatment under the law and could lead to favoritism or discrimination, directly contravening Vermont's commitment to fair and impartial government services. Furthermore, it bypasses the established procedural safeguards designed to ensure the integrity of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach would be to significantly increase the fees for new licenses to fund overtime for existing staff, without first identifying the specific causes of the delays. This is professionally unsound because it places an undue financial burden on applicants without a guaranteed solution to the efficiency problem. It also fails to address potential underlying systemic issues that might be contributing to the delays, such as inadequate training or inefficient procedures, and could be seen as a punitive measure rather than a solution. A third incorrect approach would be to reduce the number of required documents or verification steps for new applicants to speed up processing. This is professionally unacceptable, as it compromises the security and integrity of the driver's licensing system. Vermont law mandates specific documentation and verification to ensure that only eligible individuals are issued licenses, and any deviation from these requirements could lead to fraudulent applications and pose a risk to public safety. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured problem-solving methodology. This begins with clearly defining the problem and its scope, as indicated by the efficiency study. Next, data collection and analysis are crucial to understand the root causes. Based on this analysis, potential solutions should be brainstormed, evaluated for their feasibility, cost-effectiveness, and compliance with all relevant Vermont statutes and regulations. Finally, the chosen solution should be implemented, monitored, and adjusted as necessary to ensure its effectiveness and continued compliance. Question 20. The efficiency study reveals that the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, needs to accurately forecast its fleet vehicle depreciation costs for the upcoming fiscal year to support its budget request. The fleet consists of 50 sedans purchased at an average of $25,000 each, with an estimated salvage value of $5,000 and a useful life of 5 years. Additionally, there are 10 trucks purchased at an average of $40,000 each, with an estimated salvage value of $8,000 and a useful life of 8 years. Assuming all vehicles were purchased at the beginning of the current fiscal year and the straight-line depreciation method is used, what is the total projected depreciation cost for the entire fleet for the next fiscal year? Option A, $245,000. Option B, $250,000. Option C, $225,000. Option D, $200,000. The correct answer is A, $245,000. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical challenge in managing the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, fleet vehicle maintenance budget. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of cost allocation and depreciation principles to accurately forecast future expenses and justify budget requests. Miscalculations can lead to underfunding, impacting operational capacity, or overfunding, representing inefficient use of taxpayer money. Careful judgment is required to balance immediate needs with long-term financial planning, adhering strictly to Vermont's financial management guidelines for state agencies. The best professional approach involves calculating the total annual depreciation for each vehicle type, and then projecting the total depreciation cost for the entire fleet over the next fiscal year. This method directly addresses the question of future depreciation expenses, which is a key component of the total cost of ownership and a significant factor in budget forecasting. Vermont state financial regulations emphasize accurate cost accounting and forward-looking budget projections. By using the straight-line depreciation formula, which is a standard and accepted accounting practice, the DMV can provide a defensible and transparent estimate of future depreciation costs, aligning with the principles of fiscal responsibility and accountability mandated by Vermont law. An incorrect approach would be to simply average the past 3 years' maintenance costs and apply that average to the entire fleet for the next year. This fails to account for the systematic decrease in a vehicle's value over time, depreciation, which is a distinct cost from ongoing maintenance. It also ignores potential fluctuations in maintenance needs and the impact of vehicle age on repair expenses. This method lacks the analytical rigor required for accurate financial forecasting and would not comply with Vermont's requirements for detailed budget justifications. Another incorrect approach would be to only consider the initial purchase price of all vehicles and divide it by the expected lifespan of the fleet to estimate annual costs. This method completely disregards actual maintenance expenditures and the fact that depreciation is a gradual process, not a uniform annual expense spread evenly across the lifespan. It also fails to acknowledge that different vehicle types will have different lifespans and depreciation rates, leading to an inaccurate overall projection. This approach is fundamentally flawed in its understanding of asset valuation and cost accounting. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to sum the current book value of all vehicles and divide it by the number of vehicles to determine an average annual cost. This calculation represents the average remaining value of the fleet, not the annual cost of depreciation or maintenance. It does not provide any insight into future expenses and is irrelevant for budget forecasting purposes. This method demonstrates a misunderstanding of financial metrics and their application in budgeting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis and adherence to established financial principles and regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Clearly defining the objective, e.g., forecasting future depreciation costs. 2. Identifying relevant financial concepts and formulas, e.g., depreciation straight-line method. 3. Gathering accurate data, e.g., purchase price, salvage value, useful life for each vehicle. 4. Applying appropriate calculations rigorously. 5. Cross-referencing results with regulatory guidelines and best practices. 6. Presenting findings transparently and defensibly.